Patricia Williams looked at her watch as she loaded the last bag of groceries into her car. It was 3:30 in the afternoon on a sunny Tuesday. She had finished her work early at the military base and decided to get her weekly shopping done. The parking lot at Miller's grocery store was busy with people coming and going. Patricia was a tall woman with short black hair and kind brown eyes. At 45 years old, she had spent more than half her life serving in the Army. She wore simple blue jeans and a white t-shirt. Nothing about her looked unusual or scary. She was just a woman going about her day. She got into her silver Honda Civic and started the engine. The car was 10 years old but well taken care of. Patricia always kept her things neat and clean. It was a habit she learned in the military. She put on her seatbelt and checked her mirrors before backing out of the parking space. The drive home would take about 15 minutes. Patricia lived in a quiet neighborhood about 5 miles from the base where she worked. She had bought the small house 3 years ago when she got her current job. It was the first time in her adult life that she had stayed in one place for more than 2 years. As she drove down Main Street, Patricia thought about her day. She had spent the morning training young soldiers. Her job was to teach them how to survive in difficult situations. She taught them how to find food and water in the wild. She taught them how to hide from enemies. She taught them how to fight when they had to. Patricia was very good at her job. She had learned these skills during her 20 years in the Army. She had been to Afghanistan twice. She had seen combat. She had saved lives. The soldiers she trained now would go on to become some of the best fighters in the world. Many of them would join special teams like the Navy SEALs or Army Rangers. But right now, Patricia was just thinking about getting home. She wanted to put away her groceries and make dinner. She planned to call her sister later. Her sister lived in Texas with her 2 kids. Patricia enjoyed talking to her niece and nephew on the phone. The traffic light ahead turned yellow. Patricia slowed down and stopped when it turned red. She noticed a police car 2 cars behind her in her rearview mirror. The officer looked young. Patricia didn't think much about it. Police cars were common in this part of town. When the light turned green, Patricia drove forward. She stayed in the right lane and drove exactly the speed limit. She always followed traffic rules carefully. In the military, following rules could mean the difference between life and death. This habit stayed with her even when she was just driving to the store. After a few more blocks, Patricia noticed the police car was still behind her. She looked in her mirror again. The car was closer now. The red and blue lights on top started flashing. Patricia felt confused. She had not done anything wrong. Her car was not speeding. All her lights worked. Her registration was up to date. Patricia put on her turn signal and pulled over to the side of the road. She stopped the car and turned off the engine. She rolled down her window and placed both hands on the steering wheel where the officer could see them. This was something she had learned to do many years ago. It showed the officer that she was not trying to hide anything or reach for a weapon. The police officer got out of his car. He was a white man who looked to be in his 20s. He had blonde hair and was average height. His name tag said, Morrison. He walked toward Patricia's car with his hand resting on his gun. This surprised Patricia. Most traffic stops were calm and simple. Officer Morrison stopped next to Patricia's window. He did not smile or say hello. Instead, he stared at her with a serious look on his face. "License and registration," he said in a loud voice. "Of course, officer," Patricia said calmly. "May I ask why you stopped me?" "I don't think I was speeding." Morrison's hand moved closer to his gun. "Just give me your license and registration," he said again, louder this time. Patricia moved slowly and carefully. She reached for her purse on the passenger seat. "I'm just getting my wallet," she said, making sure the officer could see what she was doing. She found her driver's license and reached into the glove box for her registration papers. As she handed the documents to Officer Morrison, she said, "Officer, I'm a military instructor at Fort Braxton. I have my military ID as well if you need to see it." Morrison looked at her license but didn't seem interested in her military ID. "Step out of the vehicle," he said. Patricia was surprised. "Is there a problem, officer?" "I wasn't speeding or braking." Any laws? I said. Step out of the vehicle, Morrison repeated. This time his voice was even louder. He unsnapped the safety strap on his gun holster. Patricia's military training kicked in. She recognized a dangerous situation when she saw one. The officer seemed nervous and angry. She needed to stay calm and follow his orders. Getting into an argument would only make things worse. Yes, sir, she said quietly. She opened her car door and stepped out. She kept her hands where the officer could see them at all times. Morrison looked Patricia up and down. You match the description of someone we're looking for, he said. A robbery happened about 30 minutes ago at the bank on 5th Street. Patricia was shocked. Officer, there must be some mistake. I've been grocery shopping for the past hour. I have receipts in my car that show the time. But Morrison wasn't listening. He spoke into the radio on his shoulder. This is Unit 47. I need backup. I have a possible suspect in the bank robbery. Within minutes, another police car arrived. A second officer got out. His name tag said Davis. He was older than Morrison, maybe in his 40s. He also put his hand on his gun when he saw Patricia. This is her? Davis asked Morrison. Matches the description, Morrison said. Black female, about 45, driving a silver car. Patricia couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had spent 20 years defending her country. She had risked her life for other people. She had saved soldiers' lives in combat. And now she was being treated like a criminal because of the color of her skin and the car she drove. More people started to notice what was happening. Cars slowed down as they passed. People on the sidewalk stopped to watch. Some of them took out their phones and started recording. Patricia felt embarrassed and scared, but she kept her military training in mind. Stay calm, follow orders. Don't do anything that could be seen as threatening. The two officers now stood in front of her with their hands on their guns. Patricia stood perfectly still with her hands visible. She thought about all the young soldiers she had trained. She wondered what they would think if they could see their tough instructor being treated this way. She thought about her sister and her niece and nephew. She hoped this would end soon and she could go home, but deep down, Patricia knew this was just the beginning. Officer Morrison stepped closer to Patricia. His face was red and he looked angry. Turn around and put your hands behind your back, he ordered. Patricia stayed calm, even though her heart was beating fast. Officer Morrison, may I ask what I'm being arrested for? I haven't done anything wrong. Morrison didn't like her question. Don't talk back to me, he shouted. I told you to turn around. Patricia could see that more people were stopping to watch. Some of them had their phones out and were recording everything. She knew that whatever happened next would be seen by many people. She had to be careful. I'm not talking back, sir, Patricia said in a quiet voice. I just want to understand what's happening. I'm a military instructor. I work at Fort Braxton. I can show you my ID. Officer Davis walked around to Patricia's other side. Now she had two officers standing close to her with their hands on their guns. Just do what he says, lady, Davis said. This will go easier if you cooperate. Patricia felt trapped between the two men. She had been in many dangerous situations during her time in Afghanistan, but this felt different. In combat, she knew who the enemy was. Here, she was being treated like the enemy by people who were supposed to protect her. I am cooperating, Patricia said. I've done everything you asked. I got out of my car. I gave you my license. I'm keeping my hands where you can see them. I just want to know why I'm being arrested. Morrison grabbed Patricia's arm roughly. Because you're a suspect in a bank robbery, he said. And right now you're resisting arrest? Patricia couldn't believe what she was hearing. I'm not resisting arrest. I'm asking a question. That's not the same thing. But Morrison was beyond listening to reason. He spoke into his radio again. Unit 47 requesting additional backup. Suspect is being difficult. Patricia's military training told her to assess the situation. She had two angry officers who seemed determined to arrest her no matter what she said. More backup was coming. There were people watching and recording. She needed to protect herself without making things worse. In her 20 years in the Army, Patricia had learned to read people quickly. Officer Morrison was young and seemed scared. When people are scared, they make bad decisions. Officer Davis was older, but he was following Morrison's lead. Neither of them seemed interested in finding out the truth. Patricia thought about the young soldiers she trained. She always taught them to stay calm under pressure. "Fear makes you stupid," she would tell them. "When you're scared, you stop thinking clearly. That's when people get hurt." Now she had to follow her own advice. Within 5 minutes, 3 more police cars arrived. Officers got out and formed a half circle around Patricia. She was now surrounded by 6 police officers. All of them had their hands on their guns. Some of the officers looked confused about why so many people were needed for one woman. Patricia stood perfectly still in the center of the circle. She kept her hands visible, and her voice calm, but inside she felt angry and scared. She had spent her adult life serving her country. She had trained some of the best soldiers in the world. She had fought for freedom and justice. And now she was being treated like a dangerous criminal. One of the new officers, a woman with brown hair, looked around at the scene. "What's the situation here?" she asked Morrison. "Bank robbery suspect," Morrison said. "She matches the description and was driving a silver car in the area." The female officer looked at Patricia more carefully. Patricia could see doubt in her eyes. "Has anyone checked to see if the suspect has been caught yet?" The female officer asked. Morrison looked annoyed. "We're handling this," he said. "She was in the area at the right time driving the right kind of car," Patricia spoke up. "Officer, I was grocery shopping at Miller's store. I have receipts with timestamps. I also have my military ID. I work at Fort Braxton training Special Forces soldiers." The female officer seemed interested in what Patricia was saying, but before she could respond, Morrison stepped forward again. "I don't care what you do for work," Morrison said to Patricia. "Right now you're a suspect and you need to get on the ground." "Get on the ground?" Patricia asked. "Why do I need to get on the ground? I'm not fighting you. I'm not running away. I'm standing here answering your questions." Morrison was getting more frustrated. Patricia's calm behavior seemed to make him angrier. He expected her to be scared and do whatever he said without question. But Patricia had faced enemy fire in Afghanistan. She had been in situations where one wrong move meant death. A scared young police officer was not going to break her military discipline. "Get on the ground now," Morrison yelled. Patricia looked around at all the officers surrounding her. She looked at the people watching from the sidewalk and cars. Some of them were shaking their heads at what they were seeing. Others were holding up their phones to record everything. Patricia made a decision. She would not get on the ground unless they physically forced her. She had done nothing wrong. She was a decorated military veteran. She deserved to be treated with respect, not like a criminal. "Officer Morrison," she said in her instructor voice, the same voice she used when training soldiers, "I have followed every lawful order you have given me. I got out of my car when you asked. I gave you my license and registration. I kept my hands visible. I answered your questions. But I will not get on the ground like a criminal when I have done nothing wrong." The other officers looked uncomfortable. Patricia's military bearing was clear to anyone who knew what to look for. She stood straight with her shoulders back. Her voice was calm and controlled. She spoke with authority. This was not how criminals usually acted. Officer Davis stepped closer. "Lady, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Just do what he says and we can sort this out later." Patricia turned to look at Davis. "What exactly are we going to sort out later? The fact that you stopped me for being a black woman driving a car? The fact that you didn't check if the real suspect was already caught? The fact that you have 6 officers surrounding one unarmed woman who has been nothing but cooperative?" Davis didn't have a good answer for that. Morrison was losing patience. He reached for Patricia's arm again. "That's it. You're under arrest for resisting." But just as Morrison was about to grab Patricia, a voice called out from the crowd that had gathered. "Wait, stop right there." Everyone turned to see who was speaking. Patricia's heart jumped when she recognized the voice. Someone who knew her was here. Someone who could explain who she really was. Maybe this nightmare would finally end. The voice came from a tall man in military uniform who was walking quickly toward the group of police officers. Patricia's heart filled with relief when she saw Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell. He was her commanding officer at Fort Braxton. But more than that, he was someone she had trained years ago when he was just a young soldier. "Pat, Sergeant Major Williams?" James called out as he got closer. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. One of the most respected instructors on the base was surrounded by police officers with their hands on their guns. Officer Morrison still had his hand on Patricia's arm. He looked annoyed that someone was interrupting. "Sir, you need to step back. This is police business." James didn't step back. Instead, he walked closer with his hands visible so the officers could see he wasn't carrying any weapons. "Officers, there's been a serious mistake here. This woman is Sergeant Major Patricia Williams. She's one of our most decorated military." "Instructors," Morrison looked confused. "I don't care what her job is. She matches the description of a bank robbery suspect." James couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had known Patricia for 15 years. She had been his instructor when he was a young private. She had taught him how to survive in the desert. She had shown him how to lead other soldiers. She had saved his life more than once during their deployment in Afghanistan. "Officer, may I see your badge number and name?" James asked in his official military voice. Morrison didn't like being questioned. "I'm Officer Morrison, badge 4782, and you?" "R." James reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out his military identification. "Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell, Fort Braxton Special Operations Command. And this woman you have surrounded is my colleague and one of the finest soldiers I've ever known." The other officers began to look uncomfortable. They weren't used to dealing with high-ranking military officers. The female officer who had asked questions earlier stepped forward. "Sir, we got a call about a bank robbery. The suspect was described as a black female in her 40s driving a silver car. This woman was in the area and matches that description." James looked around at the 6 officers surrounding Patricia. "So you stopped every black woman in her 40s driving a silver car? Did you check to see if the actual suspect had been caught?" The officers looked at each other. None of them had checked on the status of the real investigation. James continued. "Sergeant Major Williams has been shopping at Miller's grocery store, as she does every Tuesday afternoon. She works at Fort Braxton, where she trains elite special operations soldiers. She has served our country for 20 years with honor and distinction." Patricia finally spoke up. "James, thank you for stopping. These officers think I robbed a bank." James looked shocked. "Patricia Williams rob a bank?" "Officers, do you have any idea who you're dealing with here? This woman has trained Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and Green Berets. She's been to Afghanistan twice in combat roles. She's received the Bronze Star for valor. She has saved more American lives than most people could count." Officer Morrison was starting to look less confident, but he wasn't ready to give up. "That doesn't mean she couldn't have robbed a bank." James stared at Morrison like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Officer Morrison, Sergeant Major Williams makes more money in a month than most bank robbers steal in a year. She has top-secret security clearance. She could lose everything she's worked for her entire life if she committed any crime. Does it make sense to you that she would risk all of that to rob a bank?" One of the other officers, an older man with gray hair, stepped forward. "Sir, we're just doing our job. We got a description and we followed up on it." James nodded. "I understand that, officer. But part of doing your job is using good judgment. Look at this woman. Really look at her. Does she seem like someone who just robbed a bank?" The officers looked at Patricia again. She stood straight and tall with perfect military posture. Her clothes were neat and clean. Her car was well maintained. Her groceries were still in the back seat. She had answered every question calmly and politely. She had followed every order without complaint. Nothing about her suggested criminal behavior. The female officer spoke up again. "Has anyone radioed to check if the bank robbery suspect has been caught?" Morrison looked embarrassed. In all the Excitement, he had forgotten to check. He spoke into his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. What's the status on the 5th Street bank robbery suspect?" The radio crackled back immediately. "Unit 47. Suspect was apprehended 25 minutes ago on Elm Street. Investigation is closed." A heavy silence fell over the group. All the officers looked uncomfortable. They had surrounded an innocent woman with weapons drawn for a crime that had already been solved. James broke the silence. "So let me understand this correctly. You stopped Sergeant Major Williams for a crime that had already been solved? And nobody thought to check the status of the investigation before drawing weapons on a decorated war veteran?" Morrison's face turned red. He looked at the other officers for support, but they were all looking at the ground. Patricia finally spoke. "Officers, I understand that you have a difficult job. I know that you have to respond to calls and investigate crimes, but what happened here today was not good police work. It was racial profiling." The female officer looked ashamed. "Ma'am, I apologize. This should not have happened." But Morrison still wasn't ready to admit he was wrong. "We followed proper procedure. She matched the description." James stepped closer to Morrison. In his military uniform with his officer's insignia, he was an imposing figure. "Officer Morrison, what exactly was the description of the suspect?" Morrison hesitated. He realized he was about to make things worse for himself. "Black female, approximately 45 years old, driving a silver sedan. That's it?" James asked. "That's the entire description? Do you know how many black women in their 40s drive silver cars in this city? Did you get a height, weight, hair length, clothing description, license plate number?" Morrison didn't answer. The truth was that the description had been very general, and he had stopped Patricia mainly because she was a black woman driving the right color car. Patricia spoke again. "Officer Morrison, I want you to know something. I have spent my career training young soldiers to make life and death decisions under pressure. I teach them that good judgment and clear thinking can mean the difference between coming home alive or coming home in a body bag. What you showed today was poor judgment and unclear thinking." A crowd of people watching had grown larger. Many of them were recording everything on their phones. Some were shaking their heads in disgust at how Patricia had been treated. James looked around at all the officers. "I need all of your names and badge numbers. This incident will be reported through proper channels." The officers began to look worried. They knew that complaints about racial profiling and excessive force were taken seriously by their department. One of the newer officers, a young Hispanic man, stepped forward. "Sir, I just want to say that not all of us agreed with how this was handled. Some of us thought we should check the status of the investigation first." James nodded. "I appreciate your honesty, officer." "What's your name?" "Officer Rodriguez, sir. I served in the Marines before joining the police force." "Then you understand respect and proper procedure, Officer Rodriguez. Thank you for speaking up." Patricia looked at Rodriguez with approval. "Officer Rodriguez, men like you give me hope that things can get better." Morrison was now looking around desperately for a way out of the situation. He had made a serious mistake, and everyone knew it. His poor judgment had created a public incident that would likely end up on the news and social media, but the situation was far from over. James was not going to let this end with just an apology. Patricia deserved justice, and the police department needed to learn from this mistake. 2 more police cars arrived at the scene. The officers getting out looked confused when they saw the crowd of people and cameras. One of them was Sergeant Martinez, a supervisor who had been on the force for 15 years. He walked over to see what was happening. "What's going on here?" Sergeant Martinez asked. He looked around at the 6 officers surrounding Patricia and James in his military uniform. Officer Morrison tried to explain. "We responded to a bolo for the bank robbery suspect. This woman matched the description." Sergeant Martinez looked at Patricia carefully. Something didn't seem right about the situation. The woman was clearly not acting like a criminal. She stood with perfect military posture and spoke in a calm, educated voice. "Has anyone checked the status of that bank robbery call?" Martinez asked. The female officer spoke up. Yes, sir. Dispatch confirmed that the suspect was caught 25 minutes ago. The case is closed. Martinez's face changed. He was angry, but he was trying to stay professional. So, we have 6 officers with weapons drawn on an innocent citizen for a crime that was already solved. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward. Sergeant, this lady is Sergeant Major Williams from Fort Braxton. She trains Special Forces soldiers. The gentleman in uniform is Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, her commanding officer. Martinez immediately understood how serious this situation had become. Treating a decorated military instructor this way could create major problems for the entire police department. Officers, weapons down immediately, Martinez ordered. Step back and give these people some space. The officers moved back, but Morrison still looked defiant. Sergeant, she was being uncooperative. She refused to get on the ground when ordered. Patricia spoke in her instructor voice. Officer Morrison, I followed every lawful order you gave. I got out of my car, I provided identification. I answered questions. But I refused to lie on the ground like a criminal when I had done nothing wrong. That is not uncooperative. That is maintaining dignity. James added, Sergeant Martinez, Sergeant Major Williams has the right to question why she's being arrested. Asking questions is not resisting arrest. It's what any intelligent citizen should do. Sergeant Martinez nodded. He had been a police officer long enough to know good procedure from bad procedure. You're absolutely right, sir. Ma'am, I apologize for how you've been treated today. But Patricia wasn't satisfied with just an apology. Sergeant Martinez, I want to know why your officers didn't check the status of the investigation before surrounding me with weapons. I want to know why Officer Morrison ignored my military credentials. And I want to know what your department is going to do to make sure this doesn't happen to other innocent people. Martinez knew these were fair questions. He also knew that this incident was being recorded by multiple people and would likely become public. The police department would have to answer for what happened here. Ma'am, you have every right to file a complaint. This incident will be investigated thoroughly, Martinez said. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward again. Sergeant, I think there is something else you should know. I served in the military before joining the force. I've heard of Sergeant Major Williams. She's famous in special operations circles. She's trained some of our best soldiers. Another voice came from the crowd of people watching. Excuse me, officers. A man in his 30s was walking toward them. He was wearing a T-shirt that said Army Veteran on it. Yes, sir, Sergeant Martinez replied. I couldn't help overhearing. Did you say this is Sergeant Major Patricia Williams? From Fort Braxton? Patricia looked at the man. She recognized him but couldn't remember his name. Ma'am, I'm Tony Carson. You trained me 3 years ago in survival techniques before my deployment to Iraq. You probably don't remember me, but I'll never forget you. You taught me things that saved my life over there. Patricia's face softened. Tony, of course I remember you. You were the one who was afraid of eating insects until I made you try them. Tony laughed. Yes, ma'am. And those skills you taught kept me alive when my unit got lost in the desert for 4 days. Tony turned to the police officers. Officers, this woman is a hero. She's trained thousands of soldiers. She's saved more lives than you can imagine. The way you've treated her today is shameful. More people in the crowd began speaking up. Several were veterans who recognized Patricia's name. Others were just citizens who were disgusted by what they had witnessed. Sergeant Martinez realized this situation was getting worse by the minute. Everyone, please step back and give us some space to sort this out. James pulled out his phone. Sergeant Martinez, I'm going to need to report this incident to my commanding officer and to the base commander. This kind of treatment of military personnel reflects badly on civilian-military relations. Martinez understood the implications. Fort Braxton was a major employer in the area. The base brought millions of dollars to the local economy. A scandal involving the mistreatment of base personnel could have serious consequences. Sir, I understand your concerns. We will investigate this thoroughly and take appropriate action. Patricia looked at her watch. Gentlemen, I've been standing here for over 30 minutes. My groceries are getting warm in my car. I've answered all your questions. And cooperated fully. Am I free to go? Morrison started to speak, but Martinez cut him off. Yes, ma'am, you are free to go. Again, I apologize for this incident, but Patricia wasn't done. Sergeant Martinez, I want the badge numbers and names of all the officers involved. I want a copy of any incident report that gets filed. And I want to know what steps your department will take to prevent this from happening again. Martinez wrote down his contact information and handed it to Patricia. Ma'am, you can reach me directly. I will personally ensure that you get all the information you've requested. James also took Martinez's information. Sergeant, you should know that this incident will be reviewed at the highest levels. The base commander takes these matters very seriously. As Patricia walked back to her car, the crowd of people began clapping. Several veterans saluted her. Tony Carson called out, "Thank you for your service, Sergeant Major." Patricia got into her car and started the engine. Through her windshield, she could see Officer Morrison standing alone while the other officers talked to Sergeant Martinez. He looked angry and embarrassed. James walked over to Patricia's car window. Pat, are you okay? Do you want me to follow? You home? I'm fine, James. Thank you for stopping. If you hadn't been here, this could have ended very differently. That's what worries me, James said. How many other people get treated this way when there's no one around to speak up for them? Patricia nodded. That's exactly what I'm thinking about. This can't just end here, James. Something has to change. As Patricia drove away, she thought about all the young soldiers she had trained. She thought about the values she had tried to teach them: courage, honor, justice, and standing up for what's right. Now it was time for her to live those values in a different kind of battle. 3 days after the incident, Patricia sat in her living room watching the local news. The video of her confrontation with police had been shared thousands of times on social media. News stations were calling it a clear case of racial profiling and an embarrassment to law enforcement. The phone rang constantly. Reporters wanted interviews. Lawyers wanted to represent her in a lawsuit. Civil rights groups wanted her to speak at rallies. But Patricia was thinking about something else entirely. She had spent the weekend reviewing the body camera footage that Sergeant Martinez had sent her. Watching it was painful, but it also gave her ideas. She could see exactly where things went wrong, and why. On Monday morning, Patricia drove to the police station. She had an appointment with Chief Robert Thompson, the head of the police department. She wore her military dress uniform with all her ribbons and medals. Chief Thompson was a large man with gray hair who had been running the department for 10 years. He stood up when Patricia entered his office and offered her a seat. Sergeant Major Williams, thank you for coming. I want to personally apologize for what happened to you last week. It was unacceptable. Patricia sat down and looked the chief in the eyes. Chief Thompson, I appreciate your apology, but I'm not here just to complain about what happened to me. I'm here to talk about how we can prevent it from happening to others. The chief seemed surprised. Most people who had been treated the way Patricia was treated wanted money or wanted officers fired. They didn't usually offer to help solve the problem. What do you have in mind, Sergeant Major? Patricia opened a folder she had brought with her. I've been thinking about this situation from a training perspective. Officer Morrison made several critical errors that escalated a simple situation into a dangerous confrontation. She pulled out the first page. Error number 1. He failed to verify information before taking action. He should have checked if the suspect was still outstanding before making any stops. Chief Thompson nodded. You're right. That's basic procedure. Error number 2. He let his emotions control his actions. When I asked reasonable questions, he became angry instead of staying professional. In combat situations, we call this losing your cool. It gets people killed. Patricia turned to the next page. Error number 3. He failed to assess the actual threat level. I was clearly not dangerous, but he treated me like an armed suspect. Good tactics require matching your response to the actual threat. Chief Thompson was listening carefully. He could see that Patricia understood tactics and training in a way that most civilians didn't. Error number 4, he failed to use de-escalation techniques. Instead of calming the situation down, his actions made everything worse. Patricia closed the folder. Chief Thompson, these aren't just mistakes, they're training failures. And training failures can be fixed with better training. The chief leaned forward. What kind of training are you talking about? I want to help train your officers. At Fort Braxton, we teach soldiers how to make good decisions under pressure. We teach them how to stay calm when adrenaline is pumping. We teach them how to assess threats accurately. These same skills would help police officers. Chief Thompson was intrigued. You would be willing to do that, even after what happened to you? Patricia nodded. Chief, I didn't serve 20 years in the Army just to complain about problems. I served to solve problems. This is a problem I can help solve. Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia worked with the police department to develop a new training program. She focused on 3 main areas: tactical decision-making, stress management, and bias recognition. The first group of officers to go through the training included Officer Morrison. He was reluctant at first, but Patricia treated him with the same professionalism she showed all her students. Officer Morrison, she said on the first day of training, everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what we learn from them. The training lasted 3 days. Patricia taught the officers how to slow down their thinking in high-stress situations. She showed them breathing techniques to stay calm. She had them practice scenarios where they had to make quick decisions about threat levels. On the final day, she addressed the group directly about racial bias. Officers, I want you to understand something. I don't think most of you are bad people, but all of us have unconscious biases. The key is recognizing them and not letting them control our actions. She told them about her own experiences with bias. She talked about times when people assumed she wasn't smart enough to be a military instructor because she was a black woman. She explained how these experiences had taught her to judge people by their actions, not their appearance. Officer Morrison raised his hand. Sergeant Major, I want to apologize again for how I treated you. I let my assumptions cloud my judgment. Patricia looked at him with respect. Officer Morrison, it takes courage to admit when you're wrong. That's the first step toward becoming better. After the training program was complete, Chief Thompson asked Patricia to speak at the Police Academy graduation ceremony. Standing at the podium in front of 200 new police officers, Patricia felt like she was back in her element. Officers, she began, you have chosen a difficult and important job. You will face dangerous situations and make split-second decisions. That can change lives forever. She paused and looked around the room. But remember this, how you treat people reflects not just on you, but on everyone who wears that badge. Every interaction you have is a chance to build trust or destroy it. Patricia talked about her own service in Afghanistan. She told them about times when good judgment saved lives and times when poor judgment cost lives. The same principles apply to police work. Good judgment builds safer communities. Poor judgment destroys the trust that makes policing possible. After her speech, many of the new officers came up to shake her hand. Several told her that her training had changed how they thought about their job. 6 months later, Patricia received a letter from Chief Thompson. Crime rates in the city were down and complaints against police officers had dropped by 40%. The new training program was being used as a model for other police departments around the state, but the letter that meant the most to Patricia came from Tony Carson, the veteran who had recognized her during the incident. He had joined the police force and was using the skills Patricia had taught him in the military to be a better officer. Sergeant Major, he wrote, you taught me how to survive in combat. Now you're teaching all of us how to serve our communities better. Thank you for turning a bad situation into something positive. Patricia kept that letter on her desk at Fort Braxton. Whenever she felt discouraged about the state of the world, she would read it and remember that change was possible. Year after the incident, Patricia was invited to speak at a national conference on police reform. Standing before an audience of police chiefs, community leaders, and civil rights activists, she delivered a simple message: Real change doesn't come from anger or blame. It comes from people working together to solve problems. It comes from turning our worst moments into opportunities to be better. Patricia never filed a lawsuit against the police department. She never asked for money or demanded that Officer Morrison be fired. Instead, she chose to use her experience to make things better for everyone. Officer Morrison eventually became one of the department's best community liaisons. He often told people that Sergeant Major Williams had taught him the most important lesson of his career, that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Patricia continued her work at Fort Braxton, training the next generation of elite soldiers. But now she also spent time training police officers, sharing the same values she had learned in the military: courage, honor, and service to others. Sometimes people asked her if she regretted not suing the police department. Patricia would smile and say, "I didn't serve my country for 20 years so I could get rich from lawsuits. I served so I could make my community better. And that's exactly what I'm still doing." The incident that started as Patricia's worst day had become one of her greatest achievements. She had turned injustice into education, conflict into cooperation, and division into unity. It was, she often said, what good soldiers do. They find a way to complete the mission, no matter what obstacles they face.